Hey guys, welcome to Oxman Garage. Make sure you like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. So in today's video, we're going to be comparing the Gen 3 Coyote intake manifold with the Gen 4 intake manifold. Alright guys, so in this video, we're going to talk about three things. One, we're going to compare the bare manifolds. We're going to see what is different and what is the same. Second, we're going to compare all the parts that connect to the manifolds, like the injectors, the fuel rails, the throttle bodies, the engine covers. We're going to see if any of those parts interchange at all. And lastly, can we swap the Gen 4 intake manifold on a Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3 Coyote? I think you can. So you got to watch this video and find out. All right, so first up we have the Gen 3 intake manifold, and this was on the Mustang from 2018 to 2023. This is the go-to manifold for those Gen 1 and Gen 2 Coyote guys that want to free up some horsepower and swap this on their vehicle or Coyote swap. And if you port this, you can free up a little bit more horsepower, but it's best to do it with forced inductions like a turbo or a centrifugal supercharger. Alright, so up next we got the Gen 4 Mustang intake manifold, and this is on the 2024. Obviously it's going to be on the 25, the 26, maybe the 27, I don't know. So obviously you have two throttle bodies that are in the front, and if you look at the side here, you can definitely tell it's a longer runner in comparison to the Gen 3. In the rear, you can see that there is a map sensor in the back. So those are mainly the big three differences when you compare the Gen 3 and the Gen 4. All right, so if you look at the underside, the intake ports are exactly the same, and I believe these are the same gaskets. So the other thing that's different on the bottom is you have kind of the checkered reinforcement of the bottom of the manifold belly. And then on the Gen 4 it's kind of like a honeycomb. So looks like it might be a little bit stronger with the honeycomb, but yeah, that's the different on the bellies. All right, so another thing that's different about these manifolds are all of these vacuum ports. You got two that are up front, one off to the side. This is probably for crankcase ventilation, and then this is another vacuum one in the back. And if you swing over here, you got one in the front behind the throttle bodies, and you got one off to the side here. Then you have a big one. This is probably crankcase ventilation, and then right here, this is probably your vacuum source for the manifold. All right, so the other similar thing is this is the same bolt pattern when it bolts to the block. So this Gen 4 would bolt down to a Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3. So you have the fuel rail bolts, the longer bolts here, and these shorter bolts will bolt onto other blocks. And also these heater hose rail connections are also similar on both sides. All right, so now we're going to compare the charge motion control valves, the solenoids here. If you look up top, the Gen 4, this connection is kind of flat and straight on mounted to the manifold, to where the Gen 3 is kind of an angle, but otherwise this is exactly the same here for both setups. The same connectors, the same hoses, so I believe this is all the same. All right, so if we compare the grommet locations for the engine cover, just eyeballing it, they do not look the same. I feel like these are closer to center and these are more outward. So I have engine covers and we'll try and put them on right now and see if they fit. All right, so let's compare the parts. So first, let's do the engine covers. So this is the Gen 4 engine cover. Will this fit on a Gen 3 manifold? It will not. So these little grommets here are a little bit out to the outside, and these little grommet buttons, or whatever the heck these are called, are more center line to the manifold. So they're closer to center line to where these grommets are out more. All right, so now we're going to compare all of the parts. So Both of the parts have been stripped off, both of these manifolds. We're going to compare everything, the injectors, the fuel rails, the throttle bodies. All right, so here are the fuel rails. We got the Gen 4 over here, and then we have the Gen 3 right here. The fuel rails, the injectors, and even the clips are all exactly the same, and they are interchangeable. They all have the same part numbers. All right, next are the fuel rail bolts that go into the manifold, into the head, and then you have the throttle body bolts. These are all exactly the same. Next are these heater hose brackets, and then the fuel rail foam. They're all the same, interchangeable, exactly the same part numbers. All right, so up next we have the throttle bodies. So right here we have the Gen 3 throttle body, and then the dual Gen 4 throttle bodies over here. They are exactly the same. They have all the same part number. So I believe the Gen 3 with this part number was 2021 to 2023, and it carried over into the 24s. I believe the 18 to 20 had a different part number on their throttle bodies. All right, next we have the water neck and the tensioner. So over here we have Gen 3 and Gen 4. All these parts are exactly the same. All right, up next is the interior sound tubes. These are exactly the same. One is a little cockeyed, but they're pretty much all the same parts and moldings on the tubes. All right, so if you take a look here, this is a water neck from the 2024 Mustang GT. This is the same low profile water neck that you'll find on the Gen 3 and the Gen 2. I believe the water neck on the Gen 1, whether that was the Mustang or F-150, was not the low profile. It was a little bit higher, and then this boss bolt right here was a little bit higher. So definitely you want to get the low profile from 2015 and up. So now we're going to put the manifold on a Gen 1 engine, and we're going to see if it physically can fit. All right, so this is a Gen 1 engine right here, and we're going to go ahead and put the Gen 4 intake manifold on. Okay. No clearance issues on either side. It's a good fit. Now we've got the water neck. Okay, so we're gonna check out the issue with the water neck here. All right, so let's put the water neck on. Okay, so it's on there. I don't see any clearance issues. All right, so let's check out any clearance issues underneath here. And as you can see, you do have some space over here. I don't know if there will be any clearance issues whatsoever. So how about we hook up the water pump? I don't have a thermostat housing here, but I have that hose that's right here. And then I have the water pump, and this is going to work with the Gen 1, Gen 2, and Gen 3. And then just by looking at pictures of the Gen 4, it all looks the same. But let's get that hooked up now and see how that looks. All right, so we have the water pump with a pulley on there nice and snug. And then we have that thermostat two-way housing on the water neck. I don't have a thermostat housing, but this is where your upper radiator hose will go across. But as you can see, just a little bit of clearance between that hose and where the manifold is. You'll also, I think you're going to have enough clearance as well to get that clamp in there as well. I didn't put the clamp on there, but I did bolt everything down, and I put the two front bolts and I bolted those into the block as well. So I think all of this is gonna fit with a Gen 1, Gen 2, and Gen 3 because they all share similar parts. Now I don't know if the Gen 4 has a different part here to where maybe you have a little bit more clearance. I don't know. Maybe it's a smaller diameter hose, but the water neck is definitely the same. So the one issue that you'll have if you're using all of these components is when you put the throttle body on, it's going to interfere with this heater hose connection right here. So if you're going to be using these throttle bodies, it's a little foreshadowing, if you're going to be using these throttle bodies, you're going to be using an aftermarket type heater hose connection here, and they do sell little shorter ones right here that you can use, or you can put AN fittings. So if you wanted to use those throttle bodies, you can get rid of this and use a smaller connection right here. All right, so now that we know that a Gen 4 manifold can fit on a Gen 1, 2, and 3 Coyote engine, let's talk about the last portion of this video, and that's engine management. So the Gen 4 Coyote manifold uses a MAP sensor, and it has 2 throttle bodies, which is completely different than the Gen 1, 2, and 3, which is going to use a mass airflow sensor, which is a MAP sensor, and then 1 throttle body. So the software cannot support 2 throttle bodies and a MAP sensor if you were to swap this onto your 2011 to 2023 Mustang or F-150. It just won't support it. But Josh, how are we going to get this Gen 4 manifold on our Gen 1, 2, and 3? So the one company I didn't mention is Holley EFI Performance. So they sell the Terminator X and the X Max control pack to work with the Gen 1 and 2 currently, so that you can do a Coyote swap on a Fox body or other type of Ford or other car. So what their control packs have that the Ford EFI doesn't have is it uses a MAP sensor. So on the back of the Gen 4 manifold, there is a MAP sensor there. So if you were to unscrew that and use Holley's MAP sensor in its place, and maybe somehow get it to work with the screw that's there, you can essentially just use a Holley EFI Terminator X or X Max to work with a Gen 4 manifold with a Gen 1 and Gen 2. So with the throttle body, you can use 2 mechanical throttle bodies. MMR sells a spacer where you can adapt other brands of mechanical throttle bodies to the front of the manifold. All right, so before we wrap up the video, let me know in the comment section, do you think the Gen 4 Mustang Coyote manifold is worth the trouble? So I think it's worth the trouble if you have the Holley EFI Terminator X or X Max with a Gen 1 or Gen 2 Coyote, possibly a Gen 3 in the future, and you're swapping it into a Fox body, classic Ford truck, and you put this bad boy on there. You figure out the MAP sensor on the back. You got mechanical throttle bodies in the front. You have the manifold ported, and then a twin turbo setup. I think that would be the ultimate cool factor at any car show, the drag strip, or just having your buddies over in the garage and they tell you to pop the hood. I think this is definitely a cool thing, and if you can make something like that work with a Holley EFI system, I think it would be worth it. Now, for you guys that have a 2011 to 2023 Mustang or F-150, the engine management is not there. It's not going to work. So your best bet to swap this manifold on a Coyote is with the Holley EFI for Gen 1 and Gen 2, possibly Gen 3 in the future. So this is going to wrap up this video. If you liked what you've seen, please like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. We'll catch you guys on the next one. This is Josh with Oxman Garage.